The story of disappearance and alleged murder of a Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi is witnessing one twist after the other. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, discussing the case with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the Turkish foreign minister. Pompeo's visit to Ankara comes after his meeting with the Saudi regime. After a full day of talks with Saudi King Salman, the Crown Prince and the Foreign Minister, Pompeo said that Saudi Arabia has promised to ensure a thorough investigation and accountability over the missing journalist.
Told me they were going to conduct a thorough, complete, transparent investigation. They made a commitment to hold anyone connected to any wrongdoing that may be found accountable for that, whether they are a senior officer or official. They promised accountability for each of those persons whom they determine as a result of their investigation deserves accountability.
Including a member of the royal family?
They made no exceptions to who they would hold accountable. So they were very clear. They understand the importance of this issue. They're determined to get to the bottom of it, and that they will conduct the report. And we'll all get a chance to see it. They each promised that they would achieve that for us.
It's the biggest story in the world, and for more of that, we're now being joined by Sami Hamdi, Editor-in-Chief of International Interest and Geopolitical Risk Consultant. Joining us live from London, Sami Hamdi, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on WION World is One. There is so much going on in this case, so many twists and turns, but I'm going to focus on the latest chilling details that have emerged from Turkish media, and at the same time, juxtapose that with the way U.S. administration, especially U.S. President, has been speaking about the whole issue, defending the Saudis, so to speak.
I think one of the things that's particularly interesting about the latest revelations was that they came out as soon as Mike Pompeo had finished his meeting with Mohammed bin Salman. I think it's important to remember that prior to Pompeo's visit, Saudi Arabia sent Khalid al-Faisal, who is the governor of Mecca and one of the prominent royals in Saudi Arabia. They sent Prince Khalid al-Faisal to Turkey in order to try to convince the Turks to ease off Saudi Arabia. Reports suggest that Erdogan was not convinced. Erdogan said, I'm not going to ease off, and so Khalid al-Faisal went back and Pompeo came to the US. I think the Turks releasing these leaks after the meeting between Mike Pompeo and Mohammed bin Salman is a clear message that the Turks are really going after Mohammed bin Salman on this. Note, there's been no official statement, but the Turks have been dripping this information slowly, bit by bit, through unofficial sources, giving it to various different news agencies to apply more pressure on Saudi Arabia. And the Turks have an aim behind doing this. Let's remember that the Turks have a very real grudge against Mohammed bin Salman. They are very angry with him because they believe that Mohammed bin Salman was involved in an attempted coup against Erdogan on July 15 a couple of years ago. And they have never forgotten that. For the Turks, this is the golden opportunity to get rid of Mohammed bin Salman now that he's on the ropes, now that there is international condemnation. The problem is, however, is that the US are not keen to let go of Mohammed bin Salman. They, along with the Israeli allies, have never found a Saudi leader so amenable to their interests in the region. Let's remember that Mohammed bin Salman has been applying significant pressure on the Palestinians to agree to impossible conditions with the Israelis. Let's remember that Mohammed bin Salman has been an integral part of trying to push through Jared Kushner's deal of the century.
Right.
Let's remember that Mohammed bin Salman has been implementing these reforms that the US are backing. The US doesn't want to let go of Mohammed bin Salman, and this is why we see this defense from Donald Trump and the US.
That's right, Sami Hamdi. If I were to ask you what happens from here on, because even Trump, US President Trump, has said that if it is found out that the Saudi monarchy, the Saudi regime, were in the knowledge of what exactly happened to Jamal Khashoggi, that it wasn't an interrogation gone wrong as they claim, what happens then? Then international pressure will mount on the US to act against Saudi Arabia.
I think with Trump's statement, I think the focus should be more on what he said after he said that statement, which is the excuses that he made for Saudi Arabia. The statement sounded more as if, look, I'm willing to entertain that maybe they knew just to keep the peace, but the reality is I'm more inclined to believe that they didn't know. I think even if it was proven that Mohammed bin Salman, or it was suggested that Mohammed bin Salman knew about the Khashoggi case, I think the politics between the nations doesn't operate on a human rights basis. And I think the proof of that is in the nature of the discussions between Saudi Arabia, US, and Turkey. In other words, it's not about whether it's freedom of the press or the killing of a journalist. It's about what can I get out of this scenario. Jared Kushner wants to save his vision. Mohammed bin Salman wants to save his skin. Turkey wants to get out of political and economic isolation that has been imposed on it because of Saudi lobbying and because of US Trump pressure. This has nothing to do with the human rights. So I think the politics will be supreme. Also, let's look at the history of the region. You have Sisi, who ousted a democratically elected president, but the world was able to reconcile that. You had Sisi, who opened fire on huge protesters in Rabaa, killing hundreds of people. The world was okay with this. In other words, that even though this is a grisly case, the history of politics in the region shows this is not necessarily enough to overthrow individuals or overthrow regimes. I think it's interesting that
Sami, I'm going to interrupt you at that stage and ask you, yes, you're absolutely right. There's so much of politics over and above the fact that it's fundamentally a case of human rights and human free speech. But at this stage, I have to ask you, you do see, big businesses, individuals pulling out of that investor summit conference that was scheduled to take place in Riyadh. You do see boycott that has begun already this time around for this Khashoggi case, simply because of the amount of media attention that's been on it right from the beginning. Do you think that this time around there are chances that things could turn out to be different as compared to the previous times?
I think the problem with the international community in general is that if the US is not the driving force, then nothing really happens. And what's problematic at this stage of the discussion surrounding Khashoggi is the very keenness of Pompeo and Trump to save Mohammed bin Salman, to come up with excuses. It was Trump who suggested that rogue elements might have killed Khashoggi. He suggested it before even the Saudis suggested it, suggesting that Trump is really looking for a way to save him. Europe doesn't take the lead on this issue. Usually in history, it is the US that decides. Who is the country that went after Saddam Hussein in Iraq? It was the US driving it. Afghanistan, it was the US driving it. Libya, it was the US driving it. Syria, it was the US driving it. If the US doesn't drive it, then nobody else tends to drive it. And this is why I think that we should always monitor what the US is actually trying to say if we're going to understand what's going to happen. In terms of the businesses pulling out, sure, I mean, the businesses, this is such a big PR issue for them. And they are pulling out of Saudi Arabia. I don't necessarily buy that it is necessarily because of human rights abuses. These companies are also involved in countries where there are severe human rights abuses. I'm not a cynic. However, we must be careful in terms of how we phrase it. I think with the normalization of relationship with Saudi Arabia after this incident would see these companies coming back. Also, let's remember, Khashoggi is not the first journalist to disappear. He's not the first journalist to be killed. He is perhaps the most high profile. There are many cases of dissident princes and dissident journalists being killed, executed, put in prison. In Saudi Arabia today, you have Sulaiman al-Dawish in prison. Human rights organizations say he's been killed. You have Salman al-Ouda, Abdulaziz al-Tarifi, Awad al-Qarni. All of these very prominent critics of the Saudi regime who are in prison, and there hasn't been the same media attention. Khashoggi is not the first case. Saudi Arabia has survived these things before. I think the media pressure is unprecedented. That is true. However, whether Mohammed bin Salman will be removed, that remains to be seen. Why? Because the US, which is the main driver of the international community response, appears to be set on trying to protect Mohammed bin Salman. And that is the tragedy of this incident.
And the US is also trying to protect the billions and billions of dollars of trade that takes place between the US and Saudi Arabia as well. For now, Sami Hamdi, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on WION.